How was it being a part of the powwow for you? What was that like?
Um, it was great. This was one of the best ones we've had in a long time. And actually, this was my 22nd, my 22nd powwow, and scheduled to be my last as director of the agency.
Mm.
I will be retiring soon.
Rick, can you tell me about how you found out about your heritage and what does your heritage mean to you?
Well, I've known about it. I was born and grew up um, in Robeson County, where the majority of the Lumbee people live. So I was born into it, and it was always knew who I was and who we were, and never had to deal with defending myself as a native or anything until I moved away. And I when I graduated high school, I went to school in Chapel Hill and lived there for after I graduated for another 14 years, lived and worked there, and then came to Greensboro to work at Guilford Native American Association in December of 2000. So, growing up, I mean, we knew who we were, and we were brought up in our culture and everything. But when you move outside of your tribal communities, things are different, especially if you don't fit the stereotypical mold of Indian with the long hair and the feathers and all that stuff. So it's important that you know who you are and be confident in who you are. And that's what one thing that we've tried to instill in our children in Greensboro, Winston, the Triad area at Guilford Native American Association. We serve approximately 7 county area. And most of the kids there, Indian kids there, were born in Greensboro, away from their communities, and so we work with them to so that they know that they know their heritage, they know who they are, and we still try to instill confidence in them, and knowing and being confident in who they are, and just a little bit of history about the agency. It was established in 1975 as a 5 in the textile industry. As you probably know, Greensboro used to be the center of the textile world, and Winston-Salem, the tobacco. We're working in the tobacco industry, R.J. Reynolds and the other tobacco companies, and they didn't require any prior training, didn't require a college education or anything like that. So that's how the Indian population started in Greensboro. Particularly, mainly Indian people started moving there in the 60s. And so in 1975, a group of Indian parents in Greensboro got together to discuss the fact that their kids were doing so poorly in school. And as you might know, you're young, but you may know the history. Um, Back in the 50s and 60s, Greensboro, and like most cities, was black and white. You were either black or you were white. We didn't have the large Asian and Hispanic populations or whatever there. So, and schools were still segregated. So, the school system really didn't know what to do with Indian kids.
Mm.
It's like, well, our schools are black and white, and you're Native American. And what the solution was at that time, which I still laugh every time I tell it now, but this is what I hear from the older people when they moved here with their and you went to they put you in the white schools. If you were a darker skinned Indian, they put you in the black schools. So in other words, you had kids from the same family, one going to the white schools and one to the black. And if my parents had moved up there, my sister and I would have gone to the white schools because we were fair skinned, and my two other brothers would have gone to the black schools because they were dark skinned. So that was the solution until integration came about, in the early 70s. And so the Indian kids had their major problem was their identity. And when you're young, and you're particularly an adolescent, that your identity is everything. Your confidence. You want to be part of this crowd or a part of that crowd. And so the Indian kids' identities were challenged. Oh, you don't look Indian. Do you live in a teepee? Where's your beads? Where's your feathers? And all this kind of stuff. And so our kids had low self-esteem and no confidence in who they were. And so therefore they were doing very poorly in the school system. In 1975, we only had one Indian student graduate from high school in Guilford County. Out of the entire county, one Indian student. All the others were dropping out. So parents got together and said, how can we address this issue and work with the school system? And that's how our agency came about, to work with our young people. And from there, it sort of became a holistic type of agency. We said, well, we need some programs for our children to build confidence in who they are. And so we started an Indian cultural program for our kids at Guilford Native in the, I think in 1976. And they would come on, and still do, come on Tuesday nights and learn about their history and their culture. And they learned the traditional dances. They made regalias. And from there, the following year, we started a small powwow in Greensboro to give them an opportunity to dance and celebrate. And our first powwow was in 1977. And so this year, 2022, this was our 45th annual. And it's grown and growing ever since. I mean, the first powwow, there may have been 15 dancers. And, it was a community thing. But then it grew to become open to everyone. And then we had dancers and drums and performers coming from all over. And it's just grown, and we're hoping it will continue to grow.
Can you talk a little bit more about the dances and like the preparation with the costumes and learning?
Yeah, most dancers, not all, but most start when they're young, you know, and that's why we have competitions at the powwow for the tiny tots, who are the young kids who are just learning to walk, up to the boys and girls, and then from there up to the juniors, then the teens, and then the adult category, and then the elders. So not all, but like I said, most will start when they're young. And some kids don't start until they're 10, 12, or even teenagers. And even adults who want to learn the traditional dances, um, they're included too. You can be a senior and decide you want to dance, and you can dance. Probably not the more competitive dances, but the traditional dances you can. Generally, there are three main types of dances for both men and women. There's the men and women's traditional, which is more of a solemn, and I'm sure you saw this at the powwows, more of a solemn, reverent type dance. Then we have the men and women's fancy. That's the really flashy, fast-paced dancing, and you have to have quite a bit of stamina and be in shape to do those. So that's why it's mostly a young people's dance. And then we have the men's grass dance, and the equivalent of that is the women's jingle dance. And I'm not sure when it began. Probably 100 or more years ago, but it was the women do that dance. If there were health issues in the community or someone was sick, then they dance, and to bring good health to that person or healing to that person. And it's called the jingle dance. And that's a women's dance only. So originally, even 10, 15 years ago, it was not the most popular one
Mm.
for the women, but for some reason, and we were discussing that at the powwow, for some reason in the past 5 years or so, it has become really, really popular. And more women are doing the jingle dance. And I think part of the reason may be that there's this movement in Indian country, and it's called Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Children. And they use that dance to bring healing to families. And so it has become really popular in the United States and Canada, especially the past 5 years. I mean, I think we had more jingle dancers at this year's powwow than we have in maybe ever, probably. So it's becoming really popular because it is a healing dance, and it's used to heal your spirit, heal your soul, heal any physical problems that you have, or emotional or mental. And so it's become really important in the past several years, and that's why so many women now are doing the jingle dance. You can order them from um, Indian businesses and stuff, but generally everyone makes their own when they gather enough of those snuff can lids to do that. They do their own. And another thing, since we're talking about regalias, the regalia that all the dancers wear is specific to them. For example, the women's traditional or the women's fancy, those are usually made by aunts and grandmothers of the dancer. And the colors that are used in it, the designs, anything that's on their dress is something that's personal to them. And the same way with the men, the colors, the feathers, the designs, it has to be personal to that particular dancer. That's your statement of who you are and what matters to you. And that's and all the regalia, none of the regalia is purchased. All the regalia is handmade, whether it's men or women, and they work on it. Of course, the dancers they may not probably don't know how to sew or do any of that stitch or any of that stuff, but family members work with them or community members, and they work on it. And so everything's handmade and made specifically for that particular dancer, which can get sort of expensive for kids because they grow, and so they have to keep getting a new regalia every year or two. But as adults, your regalia, that's your regalia for the rest of your life.
Mm. So another question is, what is one thing you want others to remember about your culture?
Um, I guess number one is that we're still here and that our culture is very much alive. That's how we have survived. Survived by, staying together as a cohesive group, as a family, and taking care of each other and helping each other. And that's how we've survived, and that's how we'll continue to survive, and that's how we'll continue to grow and make improvements. And so, just to let people know that Indian culture is very old. It's very entrenched in Indian people, and it's not going anywhere. And we're not going anywhere. It's a beautiful culture, and it's a beautiful heritage, and we love to educate others about it and share our culture with others, which is why we have the powwow every year. That's the one big event that we hold that's open to the general public, and the general public can come and not only see the dances and hear the drums and the flute and everything, and try some traditional food, but also to learn and get a chance to talk with Indian people and ask questions and learn about who we are. And our powwow is unique because it's an urban powwow. Most powwows are held in traditional, tribal communities, but it's still open to the general public. We are urban Indians, so ours is held in the city of Greensboro, and we have the majority of people, the attendants, the people who attend are non-Indian, and and that's why we use this as an opportunity to not only educate the non-Indian community, but to entertain and to have a good time with the non-Indian community. So, culture and a beautiful heritage. And as you may or may not know, today is National Indigenous Peoples Day.
No, I did not know.
Yeah, it's the second. It's always the second Monday in October.
Yes. And as a student coming from HBCU, story of my grandmother inspired me to come to the powwow and to find out more about myself. So, what would you say to those young people who had stories of their grandmothers and grandfathers telling them that they are part of the Native American culture?
I would say spend some time researching the history, because you're always probably going to find someone out there, probably in your family, maybe some of the elders, who can give you some information that will start you on the path, to finding that information. I had a great conversation at the powwow on Saturday with this elderly Black woman. She wasn't from Greensboro, but her son lived in Greensboro, and she had moved to Greensboro to live with him because, she was elderly and could no longer live alone. And we sat under the tent, the elders tent, and talked for about an hour until someone called me to go do something. But I could have talked with her all afternoon, but we were talking about, the Indian experience and the Black experience, in history, in the history of this country. And it was so amazing how many similarities there were, and I would tell her a story and she'd say, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. And she would tell me a story and I said, you sound just like my grandmother. So even though, it was Black culture and Indian culture, there's so many similarities. And I think it all has to do with family. Having gone through years and years of discrimination and oppression, you held on tightly to your community and to your family, because like I said earlier, that's how we all survived, was doing that. And the stories that you hear about, Native American blood in your history, I would say research it, as best you can. A lot of times if you go somewhere like I can't remember what they're called, but these programs that you can go through to give you your history and stuff, it doesn't always give you all of that. And particularly when it comes to Native Americans, there's not a whole lot there, because even Indian people can go on like Ancestry.com. Even Indian people can go on there and not find a whole lot about their own culture and their own history. But I would say if you find out, a specific tribe or particular tribe that one of your ancestors may have been a part of, if you can find out that information, you can start, with researching that particular tribe. So it might take a little work, but you can find out, all that you can. And that's the best suggestion I have, is to start with your family, particularly elders in your family.